Well, my understanding is that there was a Iranian cargo ship was making transit out of the Strait of Hormuz into the, the Gulf there, and in accordance with the agreement that was reached between the United States and Iran in Islamabad about the ceasefire, and an illegal American blockade that has no legitimacy under international law and is a complete violation of the ceasefire agreement. Demanded that the ship stop. The ship didn't. Then the United States, the U.S. Navy vessel destroyer, told the ship to evacuate the engine room. Then they fired on the engine room, causing the ship to come to a halt. Then the U.S. Marine raiding group was landed on the vessel and took control of the vessel. It is an act of piracy. There's no legitimacy for this action whatsoever.
Scott Ritter immediately confronts the weekend naval incident, calling it outright American piracy of an Iranian cargo ship. He explains the ship was making transit in accordance with the agreement that was reached between the United States and Iran in Islamabad about the ceasefire, yet faced an illegal American blockade that has no legitimacy under international law and is in complete violation of the ceasefire agreement. Ritter details the sequence. The destroyer told the ship to evacuate the engine room, then fired on the engine room to halt it, followed by a U.S. Marine raiding group that was landed on the vessel and took control. He repeats emphatically that it is an act of piracy with no legitimacy for this action whatsoever, painting the operation as lawless aggression that directly contradicts the very truce the U.S. claimed to honor. Takeaway: even after a ceasefire, the U.S. is enforcing blockades that violate the very agreement it signed, undermining trust and international norms. Was this weekend's boarding an act of piracy or legitimate enforcement?
It's pure psychological operation. This is about the United States spinning the events so that the president can claim that he has the upper hand, that, if, for instance, Iran were to go to Islamabad and agree to a deal, the president would say it's only because of the strong stance that he's taken in enforcing this blockade and compelling the Iranians to, see the common sense and coming to an agreement. That's all this is. It has nothing to do with, legitimately stopping flow. Even let's just acknowledge that this is an illegal act, like much of what the United States does, but the goal is to effectively halt shipping out of the Strait of Hormuz by the Iranians, and this most certainly is not doing that. So it's just pure theater of the absurd. So, no, first of all, if I were the Iranians, I wouldn't go anywhere near the United States at this juncture. The United States has a history of using negotiations as a ploy to kill negotiating teams and to carry out attacks against Iran. But moreover, there's people need to understand that we were very close to having an agreement the first time around. The Trump administration, J.D. Vance and Witkoff and Kushner, they didn't come in prepared at all. They were prepared for nothing. People were wondering why there were so many phone calls. It's because the United States didn't bring anything to the table. The Iranians brought everything to the table, the deal, everything, all the research. They had all the fact papers, everything worked out. And so what would happen is the Iranians would put a deal down. The Americans would review it, ask some questions. The Iranians would give the answers. Now, because there is no position, because they went in blind, J.D. Vance has to call back and say, hey, this is what the Iranians are saying. And Trump, of course, not prepared at all. I mean, if people understood how ill-prepared this president is, they'd be embarrassed. So Trump isn't prepared at all. He doesn't have briefing papers in front of him. He's receiving a verbal report and then giving back instructions based upon nothing, because he doesn't know what the details are or anything. He doesn't have his staff prepping him on this. This is just purely reactionary work. And then Bibi Netanyahu sticks his head in at the appropriate time about nuclear issues. They were actually this close, according to Professor Morandi, to signing a Islamabad memorandum of understanding, which would have brought an end to this war. But the president was told, you can't sign this deal because it makes it look like you're weak. It makes it look like you're doing the Iranian bidding. Well, of course he is. The Iranians are the only one putting talking points on the table. The United States has no talking points. And so J.D. Vance is pulled from the J.D. Vance, Kushner, and Witkoff are pulled from the negotiations, and they're brought to an end as Trump then proceeds to make his ridiculous, demands, and then back it up with posturing that, look, we're going to blockade you until you do what we want you to do, kind of thing. This is the kind of stupidity, insanity that governs what's going on here. But it's all about posturing right now to create an impression that the United States is in charge, that the United States is the one calling the shots. We're in charge of nothing. The Iranians are calling the shots. They're the ones who have put down the terms, and now the Iranians recognize the United States is incapable of negotiating in good faith. And so there's no reason to negotiate. And if anybody...
Ritter labels the entire high seas incident and surrounding diplomacy a pure psychological operation meant solely for spinning the events so that the president can claim that he has the upper hand. He mocks the U.S. delegation, J.D. Vance and his two Zionist monitors, Steve Witt and Jared Kushner, as utterly unprepared, contrasting them with the Iranians who brought everything to the table, including the deal, everything, all the research, all the fact papers. Ritter describes frantic phone calls because the United States didn't bring anything, forcing Americans to ask basic questions while Iranians supplied answers. He calls the process pure theater of the absurd and purely reactionary work, stressing Trump isn't prepared at all. He doesn't have briefing papers. He's receiving a verbal report and then giving back instructions based upon nothing. The segment reveals how Netanyahu's intervention and internal pressure killed a near deal, exposing profound American disarray and bad faith tactics. Takeaway: when one side shows up empty-handed and relies on posturing instead of preparation, diplomacy becomes theater, rarely producing real deals. Can a superpower win peace when it refuses to prepare for talks?
I think the Iranians are concerned about what happens next. They're not. In fact, there's a good portion of the Iranian government, together with the majority of Iranian people, that just want to bring this war to an end. And I don't mean by surrendering, an end by keep the fighting going. And, a warning, and this is, one of the things that may prevent this war. If this war starts again, Iran will more than likely terminate the viability of one or more Gulf Arab states, meaning they'll strike power production and desalination plants, making life impossible. If you do that in Abu Dhabi and Dubai, these cities will empty. You do that in Kuwait City, it's gone. You do that in Manama, Bahrain empties. And the Iranians, they're not going to play the escalation game. They're not going to say, okay, we're going to wait and see what kind of strike you hit, and then we'll hit similar targets. They're going to go straight for the jugular. And this will terminate as modern nation states, one or more Gulf Arab states. And the Gulf Arab states are very nervous about this right now. And the others are going to recognize that they will have their economic capacity to earn money permanently degraded. Saudi Arabia, rich nation right now, it won't be a rich nation if the United States resumes attacking Iran. So these are the stakes that are at play here. Plus, Ansarallah, the Houthis said they're going to shut down el-Mandeb, which is the death knell to the Saudi oil economy and the ruination of the world. Donald Trump really can't afford to go to war right now, but he's really given himself no other option. The Egyptians. I know the Egyptians have been frustrated for some time now. Israel's playing a very dangerous game with the Turks. You don't. It's one thing before Israel began bombing Iran to say that Turkey is the next Iran. It's another thing after Israel has bombed Iran not once but twice, both using surprise attacks, to say that Turkey is the next Iran. And the Turks are picking up on this, and they're saying, well, we're not Iran. We'll actually take you out. And so there's big rhetoric taking place right now. And Turkey, unlike Iran, has the ability to project meaningful ground power through Syria to the Israeli border. Turkey has a very strong air force that could challenge the Israelis. Turkey is intimately familiar with Israeli capabilities. The Israelis used to train all of their long-range strike missions using the Anatolian Peninsula as the training ground. So Israel's got to be careful here, but and Erdogan's making very aggressive statements towards Israel, and so we'll see what happens.
Yeah.
Ritter explains the Iranians' decision to walk away. They now recognize the United States is incapable of negotiating in good faith. He warns that if conflict resumes, Iran will not play an escalation game, but will go straight for the jugular by striking power production and desalination plants, actions that would terminate the viability of one or more Gulf Arab states. Specific cities are named Abu Dhabi, Dubai, Kuwait City, Manama, Bahrain, each of which will empty once water and power are cut. Ritter adds that the Houthis have vowed to shut down Bab el-Mandeb, an act he calls the death nail to the Saudi oil economy and the ruination of the world. He emphasizes that Iran's strategy is decisive and asymmetric, aimed at permanently degrading Gulf economic capacity rather than trading tit-for-tat strikes, leaving Gulf states very nervous and forcing the U.S. to confront massive unintended consequences. Takeaway: Iran's strategy is not symmetrical retaliation. It is decisive disruption that could permanently degrade Gulf economies and force the U.S. to rethink war. How much damage would it take for Gulf states to abandon escalation?
Jointly excavated is very strong. I think what had been agreed to in Geneva before the most recent round surprise attack, the act of perfidy by the United States, is that a full accounting of Iran's 60% enriched uranium would be had under the auspices of the International Atomic Energy Agency, and that United States inspectors would be part of the IAEA inspection teams. And so, that would be, have UN and have the IAEA inspectors there, include with American personnel. Now Donald Trump lives in a fantasy world where he's going to fly in American military forces. They're going to set up some sort of forward operating base and bring in heavy excavation equipment, and they're going to be the ones digging it out, and they're going to be the ones taking control of this. That just simply isn't going to happen. Trump lives in a fantasy world. His advisors are the singular worst advisors in the world about this very issue. And he's just setting himself up for defeat and frustration because Iran will not buckle. I think he's getting word from people, Hegseth and others, that we did so much damage to Iran that the Iranians have no choice but to cave. They can't afford to continue. Let me set the record straight. We did no damage to Iran. None. Zero. We've superficially blew up empty buildings. We dropped some bridges and so that. But in terms of impeding Iran's strategic capacity to continue this conflict, we've accomplished nothing. Their leadership is as strong as ever. And the underground missile cities are, according to the Iranians, they've produced, more missiles since the war ended than they were at a higher rate than they were producing before. And these are the advanced missiles, because they had all pre-positioned the production equipment, the production materials. And so they're cranking missiles out. They've re-upped their arsenals. And if this war starts, they're going to come in, like I said, with the most powerful missiles, the most accurate missiles up front. And they're not going to wait for the United States to do sufficient damage. The first bombs that drop, the Iranians should, according to what they've been saying, hit not just Israel with lethal blows, but as I said, the United Arab Emirates and at least one other state, maybe Bahrain, will be taken off the map in terms of being a viable nation. I'm familiar with two such incidents. Again, I can't confirm them because I'm not in the White House. This is just reporting. But let me just so your audience understands that this isn't just blind speculation. I have been in the White House Situation Room. I have given briefings to, the deputies level. I understand how the White House process works. I understand how the interagency process works. I understand how the JCS interfaces with the president. And so, through this experience, you get, a pattern of behavior. And that's one of the things you do as an intelligence analyst is you assess patterns. You look for repeating patterns. Past practices do repeat. So I have a good idea how the system works, especially when it comes to nuclear weapons. And so when I heard that the president, when he tweeted earlier before the ceasefire that he was going to erase Iran, that was code word for the use of nuclear weapons. And my understanding is that the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff put him on notice that no, they won't authorize, they will not concur with the use of nuclear weapons because it's a violation of international law. It violates issues of proportionality. It violates issues of distinction. And there's no justification for it. Nuclear weapons are designed, according to doctrine, to deter. You're not deterring anything with a preemptive use of nuclear weapons in an environment that doesn't scream, we have to use nuclear weapons to eliminate an existential threat. So the president was put on notice that, and he immediately responded by a tweet where he, in all caps, said, "and no nuclear weapons," as if to correct the record, to get ahead of any potential reporting coming out of the White House that he tried to use nukes and was told no. And so now this time what we have here is, in the president's mind, the psychosis of this man. He threatened nukes. The chairman said no. And so he agreed to enter this peace process. But now that the peace process is collapsing, he's falling back on the reality that if they continue, bombing the way they did before, it'll be another defeat, that we don't have a remedy to this. We don't have the magic solution. And the Iranians do have our number. They're going to ring it on a daily basis until Israel's destroyed and Gulf Arab states are destroyed. And so Trump is trying to say we have no choice but to use nuclear weapons preemptively right now to eliminate this threat. And the chairman repeated what he told the president later: no, this is unlawful. There's no imminent threat worthy of this. There literally is no, you can't speak of proportionality. The damage Iran's doing to us is not proportional to the damage that we would do by using nuclear weapons on Iran. And then again, the issue of distinction, dropping bombs, for instance, on Isfahan, would kill civilians in numbers that would, boggle the mind. And so, fortunately, even though this president has said that the Constitution doesn't matter to him, that he relies on his own personal sense of morality, this is a man whose morals say he wants to use nuclear weapons and slaughter hundreds of thousands of innocent people. Fortunately, we have men and women in uniform who took an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution, who take this oath very seriously.
The conversation shifts to Trump's off-the-wall public claim that the United States and Iran would jointly excavate Iran's nuclear-enriched material, which Ritter dismisses as living in a fantasy world far removed from the actual Geneva plan of IAEA inspections that would include U.S. personnel. He stresses repeatedly that U.S. strikes achieved no damage to Iran. None. Zero. While Iran has accelerated advanced missile production in underground facilities. Ritter then details two reported confrontations in which General Kane, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, refused the president's nuclear overtures, first after Trump's Erase Iran tweet and again later, declaring no. This is unlawful, citing violations of proportionality, distinction, and international law. Nuclear weapons exist to deter, not for preemptive use against a non-existential threat. Ritter highlights that even this handpicked yes-man chairman, brought out of retirement, has twice blocked nuclear options, underscoring the military's serious commitment to its oath to uphold and defend the Constitution, despite the president's personal morality favoring mass civilian casualties. Takeaway: even a president who claims the Constitution doesn't matter can be checked by uniformed leaders who take their oath seriously, preventing catastrophic nuclear precedent. Will military leaders keep saying no when the order is unlawful? Final call to action. Follow World Talk Recap today. Subscribe, like, and share so these critical voices reach millions more. Turn on notifications.